part of your engine rebuild is probably going to be installing the camshafts and doing the timing on the Honda VFR. I'm going to try to simplify it and explain what is going on so that you don't make any mistakes and so you understand how the timing works. The most important factor when you do the timing on the Honda VFR, because there are 4 camshafts, is that you have to remember the sequence that you did your valve clearance check. So the first thing you have to do is memorize or familiarize yourself with how to set the valve clearance, okay? Because that procedure that the service manual or any manual is going to give you is based on how you determine top dead center on the camshaft and on the crankshaft, okay? So when you do your valve clearance, it's going to tell you to turn your crankshaft and find top dead center as you measure each cylinder. That procedure is going to be the same procedure that you will align your front and your rear camshafts. Okay. Now, firstly, let me explain. This is a camshaft. This is the camshaft on the Honda VFR. These are the lobes, and these are the where the holders sit in on the upper head. On the camshaft, you will notice that there's a mark. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a straight line on one side of the gear, and on the other side, or near it, there is an arrow. Those two marks, that little slash mark or indentation and the arrow, are vital to your timing, the timing sequence, and how to install the camshafts into the engine after you remove both of them or one of them. I'll go through on how to remove both of them and install them, and then I'll quickly go through on how to install one of them, just in case you do one at a time. If you do one at a time, you don't have to bench it, or you don't have to go through any sequence to find the proper installation. What makes the Honda VFR is a V4, and what makes the 1990 and above unique from some of the other models is that on um, the timing, I wouldn't say it's the flywheel, it's the starter clutch, and on the starter clutch you have something called a pulse generator, and the pulse generator controls the timing when the spark plugs fire on these. So the starter clutch is actually controls the starter, or allows the starter to rotate, but it also acts as a timing mechanism for the spark plug timing or the pulse generator. The 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 spark plugs can only the starter gear can only go in a certain way. They have splines. They have splines on them that make it very simple for you to get the spark timing easily installed. You don't have to do any timing sequence, or you don't have to align it or anything like that. You just put it in, and the splines match up with the top dead center, on the crankshaft. So the first thing about the 1990 and above models, is that for the spark plug timing, you just put it on and you can't get it wrong. Otherwise, you have to get out a timing light and do all that crazy stuff that for the timing. That's the first thing about the timing. So once you put that starter clutch in, everything is going to be set to what the factory timing is. Next, you go to the camshaft. So you've probably already installed the starter clutch, but yeah, I can't help you if it's an earlier model. So you've already installed the timing or the ignition on it. Now you have to do the camshaft. So when you remove the camshaft, the manual tells you specifically, and technically they say go from the front to the rear, but I've done it from the rear to the front, no problem. But what you want to do is you want to set it so that it's top dead center, so it pushes the camshaft up so that you can pull it off relatively easy. You don't have to do it. You can just unbolt the screws and then tap the holders and the camshaft out very, very, very gently, so they don't damage. But when you put it on T2, the manual says you put it on T2, which puts it at top dead center on the number 2 cylinder. You take out the front camshafts. So when you remove the camshafts, technically you're supposed to put it on T2. You remove the camshaft, put it on T1, and then remove the rear camshaft. So you're using cylinder 2 as a reference point and cylinder 1 as a reference point. Those are these two marks on here. They designate cylinder 1 and cylinder 2. Okay, so the arrow is cylinder 2. The mark is cylinder 1. You have that on the front. This is there's two camshafts on the front. Okay, I'll only cover the front on here. This is the intake. On the camshaft, it has an intake. It says in right there. That's intake. The other one says X. That's exhaust. The intake sits in front of the exhaust like this. Okay, so when you put these camshafts in, let's say you have all 4 of them off, not just the 2, you have to start with the rear. And the only way you can do the sequence is to go through your valve clearance check. So the first thing you have to do is put your crankshaft on T1 top dead center. Now, on your starter clutch, there are 4 marks, T1 to T4. Okay. On your starter clutch, the side plate on the engine, there's T1 to T4. Now, on the T1 to T4, there are 3 marks. There's the double mark, there's the single mark, which is the F, and then there's the single mark, which I call the third. Okay, so you start with the double mark, you go to the F mark, and then you have the third mark. One part of the manual says that you do your timing with the F mark. The other manual says you do the timing with the third mark. It's contradicting itself, but these two are very, very close in proximity. Okay, and the piston, when you check it, is at top dead center. It begins right there and it ends right there. So I would say it's somewhere in between there. For reference reasons, go with your third. If you go with the F where it starts, maybe go a little bit after. And if you go with the third one, maybe go a little bit before. Okay, so for all technical purposes, go with the third mark. Okay, use the third mark as your reference point for what you're going to align it to, because it makes things a little bit easier when you do the arrow marks on the camshaft. Those 3 marks are very important. You're going with the third mark, and you're going to start with T1. T1 means that you can only do the rear. You don't do anything but the rear when you do a T1. Okay, so when you put the starter clutch on T1 at the third indentation or the third mark, you're only putting the rear in. Now, when you turn your crankshaft, when you turn the engine to the T1 mark, all right, you want to get a magnet or something and stick it into the cylinder 1 spark plug hole to confirm that the piston is right there, and you'll feel it when you push it down. Or you can get a flashlight, look down there, you'll see the piston at the very top. So that's top dead center on T1. All right. Once you have it on T1, you align the marks, and this is how the marks go. This is only on the rear. Your T1 mark, which is a single line, has to face the rear. So the rear here, okay, and I'm going to illustrate it. I'm going to illustrate it on a piece of paper so that you can see it. Here is the upper head, and this is the rear. This is the rear. This is the edge of it, and your camshaft here, and your camshaft here. Here is your exhaust, and here is your intake. That little mark has to sit. Actually, it's kind of like that. It's halfway below the surface. That little mark has to sit right there at the indentation mark. So that little single negative mark has to sit right there on that surface right there. The same with the front, but you're only doing the rear right now. Okay? So when you do the rear, it's going to line up to the front. That's your first point. You install the rear only. You put the rear only in, and it's going to be like that. Then you go through your valve clearance check, which rotates the camshaft 2 times. Now, let me explain this. Here's your crankshaft, okay? And then you have 4 camshafts. All right. Your camshaft, you have 4 camshafts on your crankshaft. Now, the crankshaft fires in this order. The crankshaft is how the pistons fire. It fires in a 90-degree. It fires in a 90-degree firing order, so it fires at T1 at 90 degree. You can fire T3, T3, T2, whatever. I'd say T2, T3, T4, and you're back at T1. So in one revolution, the bike is firing 4 times, and it's going to fire at 90 degrees opposed, or it fires crossfire, meaning that it goes T1 to T3, and then T1 to T4, and T1 to T3, and T1 to T2. So vertically opposed. Your camshafts, however, are different. For every turn, half turn, it's going to fire either the front or the rear. Okay? So every half turn will control 1 camshaft. So your camshaft is only half a turn on the crank. 2 camshafts means that there are 4 firing orders for every 2 half turns. Does that make any sense? Half the turn on the crankshaft means that there is 1 full turn on either the front or the rear camshaft, because there's 2 of them on each. Two halves mean that it's going to fire 4 times, making it 1 complete rotation. So basically, the front and the rear camshafts are controlling 2 cylinder firing orders. The rear ones, the intake, exhaust, and the rear are controlling 2 firing orders. But on that firing order, you have an exhaust which is your downstroke, your upstroke, downstroke, and you have your intake on your upstroke. Okay, so that's where the complexity lies. Now you have to align all four of these to this crankshaft. All right, so if your camshaft, is spinning half the rotation of your crankshaft, then you start with the rear by aligning the negative mark. And you do the negative mark so that it's right on the lip of it. That sets your rear. Go ahead and bolt them down, torque them to the specs, which I think are 8 foot-pounds for the holders, and your rear is installed. Now you go to your starter gear again and you turn it to T2, but you don't go from T1 to T2. You go through the sequence, which is 2 rotations. Now that rotation is based on the firing order. So the firing order on the Honda VFR is going to be T1, T3, T2, and then T4. Okay, so you're going to put it on T1, and you're going to put it on T3, and then you're going to put it on T2, and then T4. That's how you do your valve clearance check when you do the procedure. I don't have the procedure. You have to know that procedure in order to put the camshafts back in. If you take both of them out, okay. I'm not going to explain how to do it on 2 of them because that's pretty easy to figure out. Now, before this turns off. Okay, so you have the 2 rear ones set on the negative at T1. So you do 2 rotations. You do 2 rotations on your crankshaft. Does that make any sense? Because it's every 2, you do 2 rotations or follow your valve clearance check to T2. So you go T1, T2, T3, T4, T1, and then T2. Now you go to the front. And on the front, the same thing, but this time it's the arrow. Okay? So you line the arrows with the front. All right? So now that your rear is aligned and you do your valve clearance procedure to T2, you align the marks and you do your T2. Now, that is 2 rotations on the crankshaft. That controls the 4 rotations of the camshaft. All right? So now that the camshaft has rotated 4 times, it's on the T2 firing order at top dead center, which is the same as your procedure on your valve clearance check for top dead center. So now you know that the T2 is on top dead center on the 4th rotation. You put the camshaft in, facing the front going back, the rear going back, and the front going forward, right on the lip of the upper head. That will now set your T2. Now you have to check it. To check your timing marks now, it's only going to either be on the intake or exhaust. Okay? So how do you know if you're on the intake or the exhaust? Well, that right there tells you if you're in the intake or the exhaust. But if you don't know, when you spin this, okay, so now you do your valve clearance check. First thing you want to do is find top dead center for your valve clearance check on T1. When you do, those marks, all 4 marks now, should be negative up here and negative here. That's T1. On T1, you're going to see all 4 of these marks now, telling you that you're on the intake stroke. Next, you're going to go through, which is 4 rotations on the camshaft or 2 rotations on the crankshaft, and you're going to get T2. Okay? So on T2, which means top dead center on the number 2 cylinder, you're going to find these marks on the front and on the rear. Okay, so when you see the arrow, when you see that arrow on the front, and when you see that little slash on the rear for your sequence, then you know the timing's set. To check it, you want to look into the spark plug hole at T1, and the piston will be right there at the top. Then you want to check it on T2, which is 2 rotations on the crankshaft, not 1, and you will see the piston right there on the top. Okay, so that means that those 2 rotations on the crankshaft have now actuated the firing order on 4 camshafts, or 4 turns on the camshaft to your firing order at T2. It's a little complex. Now, if you find out that it's not on the intake, then all you got to do is put it on the exhaust, which is 1 rotation. So if you find out that you made a mistake or something went wrong, go back to your intake, do 1 rotation, and now you're at the 2nd rotation or the exhaust. It's a little complex, but I think you should get it. Understand. Now I'll summarize. Okay, to summarize this, the crankshaft is controlling 4 camshafts. Okay, you have 2 on the front and 2 on the rear. The VFR has gears. These gears are attached to that camshaft. When the firing order, okay, it's 90 degrees firing order. So the firing order is 1 turn, 4 firing. That firing order has to control the front and the rear for the exhaust. Missy, stop. We'll go outside in a second. All right, buddy. Hang on. Missy, go. All right, we'll go outside in a second. Well, I got to take my dog out, okay? So there you go. That front and rear camshafts, you got it. Okay, let's go.